BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Wake Up to Money from BBC 5 Live.
Hello, welcome to Wake Up to Money. Prices rose at the slowest level in almost 18 months in July. So is the Prime Minister set to meet his target of halving inflation by the end of the year?
If we don't tackle inflation, then prices are going to stay higher for longer. Mortgages and interest rates are going to stay higher for longer.
As always on a Friday, we're going to take a look back at that and the other big stories this week. Then one of China's biggest property developers files for bankruptcy. So we'll look at what's causing those economic problems for the country. Then, do you still use cash? Banks will now face fines if they don't provide free access to cash withdrawals. And
Russo inside the area!
will the Lionesses become champions of the world? The government is supporting relaxed alcohol laws this Sunday. We'll get the business reaction as the team prepares to face Spain in Sunday's World Cup final.
Wake Up to Money with Felicity Hannah.
Oh, it's a busy programme. Good morning. It is it's not September, it's August the 18th. It's Friday. It is 5 minutes past 5 and it's Wake Up to Money. And what a week it has been. There has just been no silly season, has there, when it comes to the financial news this week. We will be chatting through some of the biggest stories with some highly informed experts in just a moment. And of course, we will be getting steadily throughout the show more excited about the football. But we'll also be talking about access to cash and those plans to fine banks if they fail to provide easy access to free cash withdrawals. So tell me what it's like where you are. Is it easy to withdraw money without having to pay a fee? Maybe you're one of the people in a cash desert. Maybe you just don't really need cash anymore. You're just not really using physical money. Get in touch. You can text me on 85058. You can send me a WhatsApp message to 08085 909 693. And if you're on social media, maybe if you're listening to the podcast, then use the hashtag WakeUpToMoney. You can keep the conversation going that way. But of course, first of all, it is Friday. We've got our panel ready to provide some of that more thoughtful analysis of those big money moments this week. I'm joined by Carlene Jackson, CEO of Brighton-based tech company Cloud9 Insight. That provides UK businesses with cloud-based software systems. Also, Michael Hewson, Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets UK, and Catherine Nice, Chief European Economist for PGIM Fixed Income. Panel, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was a real classroom here. Good morning, Felicity Hannah.
Good morning, Miss. Wishing the year away.
Well,
September.
I know. I wrote it down as I came in. I don't know why. I must be wanting my kids to go back to school. I think that might be it, Michael.
That's probably it.
So, first of all, we're going to talk later on about this. But before we get into the week's news, what about still using cash? I mean, Carlene, are you someone who's gone entirely digital? You're obviously a very, very tech-based in your work, but are you still using notes and coins?
Oh, I have to really hunt around to get some cash, but I think Apple Pay is what we use these days, isn't it? Rather than even cards. And so you just grab, your phone is everything. But when it comes to things like babysitters or buskers, then that's when you really need to sort of scrape the barrel and look for cash. But yeah, I do feel sorry for buskers out there or people looking for spare change, because it's really rare for me certainly to carry any around at all. So it's becoming a cashless society, really.
I mean, I very rarely have cash, but I was on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh watching some street performers in the festival earlier this month, and at the end, they're obviously sort of holding out their hat, and I wanted to give some money, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash on me," and he just pulled out a card reader. So
no way.
Clearly, lots of people are finding new ways to make it work. Catherine, what about you? Are you still using actual physical money?
I confess, not too much anymore these days. I think the real difficulty comes with the coins. I don't even have, a coin purse anymore that I carry with me every day. So I will try to keep bills for sort of emergency instances where maybe my phone has run out of battery, or on occasion when you find that someone doesn't accept card. But it's those coins, and I think I've found myself at a grocery store on some occasions where I need to have a pound coin, and then I'm a bit at a loss for what to do.
You're not the only one at a loss, actually. The Tooth Fairy recently brought my youngest €1 by mistake. So clearly lots of people, lots of different people in lots of different walks of life are scrambling around a bit. Michael, later on in the show, we're going to be talking about this news that ministers are encouraging councils to let pubs open earlier where possible and maybe even start serving alcohol earlier on Sunday ahead of the World Cup final. And I was thinking, I'm very excited about the match, but at that time of day, I think I'm more likely to be raising a coffee than a pint. What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you. I don't generally tend to drink anything alcoholic much before midday.
How restrained.
Especially on a Sunday of all days.
Yeah.
To my mind, I think this is a good thing. I think it's good that people can gather, have a tea, have a coffee. I don't necessarily think you have to drink alcohol to enjoy a game of football, though having said that, watching England men, sometimes you do need a drink or two.
Or sometimes just to help you get through it.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe not to calm the nerves, but just trying to make it tolerable. But, when I watch the Lionesses, I tend to have much more confidence that I actually do the job. I don't know why that is. And I was talking to my wife about it. And she's of the same mind. We're both big football fans. She supports AFC Wimbledon. I support Arsenal. And for me, I think watching England women play, it's not anywhere near as stressful experience as watching the men. So
85058, if you agree with Michael, let me know if you fancy being in the pub to watch that match. And if you would want to be raising an 11 a.m. pint on this very special occasion, get in touch. Mike on Twitter says, cash is useful for tipping good service in my local cafe. Street buskers, car parking, long live cash. Keep your thoughts coming. Now, let's get into the week that was. There was some ever so slightly good news for the economy this week. Let's take it. We learned that inflation slowed to 6.8%. Now, that was largely due to lower energy costs, but pressure still very much remains on households. It doesn't mean prices have started to fall. They've just slowed in how fast they're rising. We saw food, restaurant, hotel costs still staying very high. But it's a lot better than it was, isn't it? It was at a peak of 11.1% in October. It's still way beyond the Bank of England's 2% target. Here's what the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had to say.
If we don't tackle inflation, then prices are going to stay higher for longer. Mortgages and interest rates are going to stay higher for longer. And I don't want to see that happen because I don't think that's right. And I want you guys to feel better off at the end of every month, at the end of the year. And that's why we've got to bring inflation down.
Carlene, there is still clearly a long way to go before we get inflation where it's meant to be. How's it affecting your business?
So I guess in a few ways, first of all, I'm actually in the process of moving office. And the office that I'm moving into, it's sort of about twice the space. First of all, there's a lot more office space available, so it's a renter's market. But I'm also have an open mind to buy. And the previous person who wanted to take on the office that I'm moving to, actually it fell through, which is obviously good news for me. But they had difficulty accessing money really to see that through. And the other side of it is that the sellers have actually offered to hold the selling price of having the option to buy the property for 3 years. I've never heard of such a thing, but obviously that's good news. But certainly you wouldn't really want to be signing up for a mortgage right now with the interest rates the way they are, and the unpredictability means you also wouldn't really be probably wanting to take on the risk of not having that fixed for some time as well. So it's not the ideal time for taking on a mortgage either.
No, and you're so right. And until inflation comes down, mortgage rates are likely to stay high, stay worrying. Michael, are the markets pricing in another rate rise because of some of the numbers we saw this week?
Yeah, the Bank of England is looking to probably raise rates again in September. Now, you can question whether or not they should. Personally, I don't think that they should, because I think there's a significant amount of lag built into the 14 rate rises that they've already implemented over the last 18 months. But nonetheless, those wages numbers earlier this week have pretty much put the seal on the deal when it comes to 25 basis points. Some people are suggesting we could see 50. I doubt that. I think we're very close to the end when it comes to rate hikes, as long as the Bank of England doesn't overreact.
Catherine, the Prime Minister has staked a lot of his reputation on getting inflation down, but can the government actually do anything to help bring inflation down, or is it just relying on the Bank of England's actions?
Well, the government can contribute to that objective through what it's doing on the fiscal side, through government spending, because of course that is impacting on overall UK demand conditions, which in turn feed into inflationary pressure. If demand in the UK is strong, then pricing pressures will be, other things equal, higher. Whereas if demand is cooling, that will help to bring inflation back down. So there are things that the UK government can do to help contribute and support the central bank, whose primary mandate is to get inflation back to target.
I suppose one thing they could do would be to raise taxes, which puts the squeeze on everybody's spending. But that would be politically, Catherine, potentially quite problematic as we approach an election.
Yes, it will have political consequences, no doubt, but that is one mechanism to help reduce demand in a similar way, different, but in a similar way to raising interest rates. Is also raising the cost of borrowing for households and firms, which in turn squeezes out other forms of spending and helps cool the economy and bring it back to target. So these are, different but complementary ways in which authorities can help to bring inflation back to target.
Are we an outlier here in the UK in terms of inflation? Are other countries around the world going through what we seem to be going through?
Well, we have seen that inflation is high elsewhere. We see it in the euro area, we see it in the US. But that said, the inflation problem here does appear to be magnified. And in my view, that reflects the fact that we here in the UK are experiencing both what you're seeing in the US, which is a very tight labor market, pushing up on wages, pushing up on prices there. We're seeing that here in the UK too. But in addition to that, we're also very much exposed to what was happening to European wholesale energy prices on the back of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so we're really feeling the effects of both of those impacts on inflation, which is just making the inflation problem here in the UK that bit more challenging.
Something else that's potentially going to make it challenging are the figures we had this week out on wages and unemployment. And we saw that regular pay rose by 7.8%. That was the highest annual growth rate since comparable records began in 2001. And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the numbers don't quite match up in terms of the time period, but it does suggest that pay rises are starting to overtake inflation. People might start to feel a little bit better off. But that, of course, adds to these concerns that the Bank of England might have to raise interest rates again. Catherine, inflation down, wages up, interest rates probably heading up. Are we in the end stage of this, do you think?
So I would agree with what Michael said. I think the Bank of England is probably on track based on the data that we've had this week and previous data to raise rates again at 25 basis points. That said, we are going to get another batch of data between now and then. So the situation could look different by the time we get to the next policy meeting. But, based on what we know now and the direction of travel that these data do suggest, I think the bar is probably pretty high for the bank to step back just now from raising rates. So I think we're getting there, but we're just not quite there yet.
Carlene, what does it mean for you and your staff? Are you having to raise pay to help keep people actually behind your desks?
Well, it's quite difficult. I think through the pandemic that people probably held on to people more to probably in some ways also just to give them more job security. But since we've come through that, I think people are taking a really hard look at productivity, thinking what can we do with technology, for example, to automate what we're doing. Using tools like generative AI is going to be quite important for a lot of businesses. But in our business, we've definitely taken a hard look at sort of who are the high performances. We measure on a monthly basis value add contribution for every employee, and we're constantly looking at how can we drive productivity up of the team. But sort of wage sort of pressures on us to sort of give multiple rises, not even just one a year, is very high, and that definitely takes a big knock onto profits, because you can't always, you don't always want to pass on those higher costs to your customers. And in the service sector, of course, your primary overhead really is your employee sort of wages, and it's a very competitive market, since that a lot of employees that we have have come from all over the world, and with Brexit, it's been harder to employ overseas workers as a sort of smaller pool. People are retiring, and so it's a very difficult market, and you have to be very competitive. So we're doing things like hybrid working. We've got a 9-day fortnight with a view to moving to 1 day, a 4-day week. So
just to get people sticking around, just to compete in that labour market.
100%, yeah, and that definitely for the younger generations, well, even the older generations, I think that's.
We all like Fridays off.
Who doesn't like Friday off? Yeah, why is it always Friday as well?
Never for me. Michael, this is really interesting, isn't it? Because in that same ONS data that was signed, the UK jobs market is weakening slightly. The unemployment rate rose from 4% to 4.2%. The number of people in jobs ticked lower. What's causing that, and what's your take?
Well, I mean, the unemployment rate's gone up from where it was the end of last year, 3.5% to 4.2%. But what we're also seeing is vacancy rates coming down. And I think that's symptomatic of the fact that some of those vacancies companies are now no longer looking to fill. I think there's also the fact that you've got to keep costs down. People are finding it much more difficult. But other than that, I think it's the uncertainty, going forward into the back half of this year, on the back of the Bank of England rate rises, because no one, I think, really knows what effect, the lag effect will be when all of these fixed rate mortgages roll off and get refinanced at a higher rate. And my concern here, Felicity, is that the Bank of England, in trying to fix the errors of being late to the party when it comes to raising rates, is making the opposite mistake when it comes to addressing the criticism that it was late, and it could overreact on the other side of it. Now, one of the things I took from that data earlier this week was services inflation. If they raise rates again, rents may well go up in concert with that, and that could actually make inflation a lot stickier, because landlords will put their rates up, rents will go up, and consequently costs will go up everywhere else. So there'll be a ripple effect. So for me, I think it's really the uncertainty as those 2-year fixes roll off, 5-year fixes roll off. How much more money will consumers have in their pockets? I think it will be less than in the first 6 months of this year.
The economy is a difficult beast to herd, isn't it? It can react in ways that we don't necessarily expect. And that has a big impact on businesses, like Carlene was explaining there. But we saw a big impact on one business this week. Another high street giant had a fall. Wilko called in administrators. Now, it's been trading since 1930. It's got more than 400 shops. It employs 12,500 workers. Very, very difficult week for them. PwC, which is acting for the company, set Wednesday as a deadline to try and flush out serious bids for the firm. We know 2 retailers were interested in making an offer. It's reported that some private equity firms might be interested in investing. So there is some hope, but we don't know how much hope to have. We don't know how many shops could be saved, or even if the name, the branding would be kept. Carlene, another classic high street name going to the wall. I mean, does that surprise you?
It's very tragic. Personally, I lived in France for a while, and in France they don't have high streets like we do in the UK, or many of the cities don't. And you go to these off-sites that you drive to, and drive even between shops within the within the commercial estate, as they call them. And I certainly have a big love of high street shops. And I've got 3 kids. One of them is 9, and he loves nothing better than to go to the Lego store and have what I would call an experience, to interact with the Lego boxes, see them come to life, play with the Lego. And my daughter's she's in her early 20s, and she is at uni, and up in London. She loves to go to Gymshark on the high street, and they offer an experience where you do some runs, and if you do so many, you get a T-shirt, and then you get a milkshake when you get back. And so there's some clever brands, you could say, really thinking about the experience of what it means to go shopping, and I think that's what's really drawing people in. But not every retail organization has really sort of understood that, and if they do, then they realize that it's not just about consuming products, it's about the experience. And I think more and more companies are waking up to this.
I certainly have an experience when I take my children to the Lego shop, but it's more a sort of financial shock experience. I think they want everything there. Michael, any thoughts on who might be the main contenders here for Wilko? Would it be retailers, or is private equity more likely?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, because I think if you look at this particular space, it's actually quite a crowded sector. There was some chatter earlier this week that B&M European Retail, who are listed on the FTSE 100, might be interested. Obviously, you've got Poundland, you've got The Range, you've got Home Bargains, which I think is owned by private equity. So, where I live, we had a Wilko. I think there was a Wilko in Worthing, which we used to visit on a fairly regular basis. But we go to places like The Range, Home Bargains, and what have you. And you've highlighted yourself how challenging it is for the retail sector. I mean, even for companies like Tesco's and Sainsbury's, their profits have halved this year as their costs have gone up. So sadly, you're always going to get casualties, particularly in such a challenging retail environment.
It is sad. I mean, any business going under, or any business struggling, is sad. But it is sad somehow when it's these big names. Although I have to say, everybody I know thinks it's Wilko's, and it's only really when it's been in the news this week.
That.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody did. I think even I did.
I thought it was Wilkinson's. But,
it was.
Yeah.
It was. But then, Wilko. Catherine, we're going to get retail sales figures later this morning after 7 a.m. What is the situation in the retail sector here in the UK right now?
It's been a bit choppy. I'm not quite sure, what to expect out of these July figures. The weather in July was pretty challenging here, and the weather does tend to affect retail sales in the UK, and that footfall on the high street, as we were just discussing. So it may be that we get a rather limp figure coming out for the data later today. But it's not clear, how much we should read into that, whether that's just due to, things that were happening in July, all that rain keeping people at home.
I've seen some suggestion there might be a Barbie bounce because lots of people kind of got out spending. Then
there is, of course, there is that as well. I think more generally, we are seeing signs that the UK economy is cooling. We've talked about, unemployment ticking up. We've talked about vacancies coming down. You are seeing, if you look over the sort of broad sweep of, since, say, the middle of last year, clear signs that things are coming off. I think the question for the bank is, are things coming off as quickly as they would like to see in order to be more confident that inflation is going to come down in a sustainable way back towards the target. And this comes to Michael's point. It's a very difficult judgment to make because they have done quite a lot of increases in terms of the interest rate for quite some time now. We've seen to date is some signs of cooling, but I think most people who have looked at, previous impacts of rate rises would expect there's a lot more to come. So there is a risk here now as we head towards, so-called peak rate, for interest rates at the Bank of England, that things could start to unravel more quickly. And I think that is the concern and the uncertainty in the outlook.
So it's been said, hasn't it? Bankruptcy happens very slowly and very, very, very fast, and perhaps interest rate impacts they can take time to feed in, and then suddenly have a big impact. That's been a fantastic look back at the week that was. Catherine Nice, Chief European Economist for PGIM Fixed Income. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to let you get on with your morning now. Thank you for being with us, Carlene. Michael, stick around. There is a lot more to talk about this morning. Maybe swig some tea. Before we go to the news, it's been a week of bad news for the world's second biggest economy. And now one of China's biggest property developers has declared bankruptcy. The stalling property market in China was already a concern. We've been talking about it on Wake Up to Money. It took another hit last night when China Evergrande Group, the second largest property developer by sales, filed for Chapter 15 protection in New York. And this comes after data this week showed poor retail sales, industrial output in the country. And that seems to have shaken confidence around the world. We've seen investors selling off stocks and bonds. Let's talk to Duncan Wrigley, Chief China Economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Duncan, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Well, I mean, I'd like to know how concerned I should be about China Evergrande Group. What's going on?
Oh, well, China Evergrande Group has been in a massive debt crisis, really, and this is just the final chapter of that, over the last 2 years. In 2021, it really started to hit the skids. It stopped paying a lot of its suppliers and also bondholders, this kind of thing. You know, there are two elements of that underlying. One is very slow housing sales, you know, partly because of the pandemic, but that's still continuing. And secondly, the nature of Evergrande's strategy in the previous years, which was very, very aggressive. You know, its basic strategy was borrow as much as possible, buy as much as land as possible, and develop that and hope that the sales would enable it to buy a bunch more land. And it, you know, that enabled it to become the second largest developer, as you just mentioned, over the previous decades. But when things slowed down, it left it very exposed and unable to pay all of its debts.
Right. What kind of impact might that have on China, on the world's second biggest economy?
Well, Evergrande is only one developer that is in trouble within China's property sector. There are a number of others. Country Garden is another one, a very large developer, which is getting into trouble too. And the property sector in China has been one of the most important engines of growth really since the last 20 years. Now, the property sector is undergoing, I would say, some structural changes as well as some kind of cyclical changes from the pandemic. The structural changes are that, you know, if you look at China, it's actually a continental size economy with 600 markets, 600 different cities, quite a variety. Now, of those cities, you have some, the top cities which compare to London, New York, they're global centers. You know, these are cities that have got long-term good fundamentals. They're undergoing a soft patch. But then at the other end, you have a bunch of small cities or cities in kind of far periphery areas which were way overbuilt in previous years, and they have falling population, young people leaving to big cities. You know, some of those cities are never going to probably get fully back on their feet. And so what we're seeing right now in the Chinese property market is a process of kind of restructuring. Slow home sales, people are still worried coming out of the pandemic. The economy looks quite weak. People are worried about their jobs, so home sales still remain quite low. But I think we're going to go through this period of a couple of years where the property sector isn't acting as a traditional role as an engine of growth, but it's really a drag or contributing very little to growth while the property sector goes through this restructuring. So
that's what it means for China. What about people heading out to work here or heading back after a night shift? What impact will it have globally and potentially here in the UK?
Well, I would sort of look at two things. So one thing is that, you know, it was hoped that China would be a big contributor to global growth this year. The IMF had big hopes. You know, that's not going to pan out as much as had been hoped for. And of course, the rest of the world is also slowing. So we're going to have a softer global economic growth environment, which will affect the UK inevitably. And number two is kind of the inflationary front. So most countries in the world, including the UK, their problem is high inflation and trying to bring that down. China this week reported a fall in consumer prices, a minor one, but also has been reporting sharp falls in producer prices, and export prices have also started to fall by 6-7% in the last month or two. Now, that helps high inflation countries on the margin because Chinese goods, stuff made in China, are going to be cheaper. So, it's not going to completely solve the problem, but for the things that the UK imports from China, whether it's, electronics, maybe furniture, toys, they'll be a little bit cheaper, and that will slightly help the UK's inflation problem.
Duncan Wrigley, fascinating talking to you, Chief China Economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Thank you very much for being with us. Loads of you getting in touch on this cash issue. Mark says, the cash machine nearest me has been out of order for nearly 2 months. Steve says, cash should be banned ASAP. This would reduce the scope for much criminal activity and especially the untaxed black economy. Steve, Mark, thanks very much for your messages.
Hear them do their thing in the Premier League. Then hear what they have to say on BBC Sounds. Subscribe to the Players channel and get inside the footballing minds of Premier League icons. From the Footballers Football podcast.
I'm getting stick for arguing with one of their players, and that's a player that they was booing themselves not too long ago. So
to Football First with Troy Deeney and Jermaine Defoe.
I just laughed. I went, don't worry, you'll play me next week.
And much more to come as we head into the new season. Real football talk straight from the players. The Players channel. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Wake up to money with Felicity Hannah.
How much do you still use cash on a day-to-day basis? Loads of you getting in touch with this. One person says, I'm getting really fed up with these people who say it's either card or Apple Pay. Twice this week, I took my daughter to the hair salon and a beauty salon to get her nails done for our holes. Both proprietors want cash only. One was saying it's too expensive to have a card machine. There's loads of local shops who have a minimum for card use, and taxi drivers still prefer cash. Some don't use card machines. And this person says it's a myth that we're a cashless society. It's more driven by those in bigger cities, certainly not in smaller towns. We're talking about this morning because for a lot of people, cash is still vital. For that person, for example. And now the government is giving regulators new powers to make sure banks are giving their customers free access to cash. From today, the Financial Conduct Authority has the power to fine banks that aren't offering free cash withdrawals within 3 miles of their rural customers and 1 mile of their urban customers. Let's talk to Natalie Seeney, who chaired the government's independent Access to Cash review, which reported back in 2019. And Natalie, you're now the chair of the non-profit Cash Access UK. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. All right, so you did this report in 2019. We've taken a while to get to this point.
We have. To be honest, in government terms, 5 years to get to legislation is quicker than many things.
True.
But it has taken a while. And when I started the review, cash was still dominant, and people laughed at the idea of a cashless society. Now people are really worried it's happening, and cash use has fallen a lot. So this law is coming in just at the right time.
So what exactly is it going to mean? Is it going, if a bank knows that they've got some customers in a certain area, but a different bank is providing free access to cash, will that count and they won't have to install a free ATM there?
Quick answer is yes, that will count. I mean, what the law is essentially saying is that what we've got in the UK now is broadly okay and it mustn't get worse. So it's not saying that every bank has to be everywhere, but it's saying that customers have to be able to get out cash and, importantly, deposit cash too, for small businesses in particular, close to where they live or work. So it means that if you've got a town, say, with 5 banks, a couple can close, but as long as you leave a service that can give cash and take deposits, particularly for a decent-sized town. And if the banks all want to leave, then if the town is big enough, it needs a shared service such as a banking hub.
Yes, but these banking hubs, they're a bit like unicorns, aren't they? We talk about them a lot. We don't actually see very many. Is it 5 or 6 there are in the UK right now?
We have 8 up and running now.
Oh, fantastic.
We've got 70, more than 70 now in the pipeline. The challenge is it just takes a while. If anyone's bought a house, you'll know it takes a while to find the property, do the conveyancing, do the fit out. but we are in process of setting up another 70. And I think within a couple of years, we'll have a couple of hundred across the UK, making sure that in towns where bank branches have gone, we have shared facilities that actually support all the banks.
And that really matters, doesn't it? Because an average of more than 50 UK bank branches have closed every month since 2015. I mean, it's a staggering number that we've lost. Is this law, this change, going to solve all the problems? Because it ensures access to cash, and you're talking about access to being able to deposit cash if you're a business. What about those businesses that still want to go cashless? You do see that more and more.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think this is the next debate. I've spoken to hundreds of small businesses over the last few years. Most small businesses on the high street want to take cash if their customers want to pay. The big problem for many is how they then deposit that cash. When there was a bank branch opposite, they could shut up for 10 minutes, pop out, deposit the cash, get back. If they've got to shut up shop for a couple of hours and drive to a nearby town, that's no longer viable. So actually, this law will help, because making sure that there are deposit services for small businesses will let most small businesses still keep open. I think where we will need more action is around particularly council services like parking or monopoly services, gas, electricity, water, where actually customers don't have any choice and they've got to be able to still pay in cash, which most do, but not all.
I want to read you a message from Peter in Norfolk. Peter, congratulations, because Peter says, big moment for the indoor bowling club I'm treasurer of yesterday. We received our first card reader. With the demise of our only local bank, we're looking to reduce the size of the cash swag I have to take into the post office every week. And Peter says, I've become an expert in the cash readers available, decided to buy one in the end. Peter has adapted to the fact that it's less easy to go and deposit cash, to withdraw cash. He's adapted. He's moved into a more digital facing way. Other businesses are going to do that. And we're going to see more people. The trend towards cashless feels like it's continuing. Will these laws relax as more people move away from physical cash?
The laws will relax, and the way the government has phrased this is to say that as times change, so will the law. But we've got to remember that there are still around 5 million people in Britain who are dependent on cash, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So my father-in-law's got dementia. He used to manage his own bank account online. Now he can't manage a debit card. Kids, we've already talked about kids spending money. Domestic abuse victims often have an abusive partner take over their bank account, and cash is the only way they can buy something for themselves. And the biggest reason people are dependent on cash is low incomes. So particularly with the cost of living crisis, we've actually seen the number of people who rely on cash to budget go up. So, cash now accounts for only 15% of all transactions. So it is a minority, but it's an important minority who without cash would really struggle.
And yeah, some of those examples you've given there, I think, really point to just how important it is to keep that access at the moment. Natalie Seeney, who chaired the government's independent access to cash review and is now the chair of the non-profit Cash Access UK. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Loads of you have opinions on this. It's really interesting to see the sort of the divide. Helen on X, says, I only use it to give to the kids to go into the village and buy lunch at the weekends. A weekend treat, she specifies, not because we don't feed them outside of work hours. Village post office has free cash withdrawals. I get it from there on Friday evenings. It's a beautiful circle of financial life. Do keep your thoughts coming this morning. With me throughout today's show still is Carlene Jackson, CEO of Cloud9 Insight, and Michael Hewson, Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets UK. Carlene, I was really struck by some of the examples Natalie gave there about just how important cash can be. Does that cause you some concern that as businesses become increasingly digitized, increasingly digital, that perhaps we'll be moving away from cash to the point where we might leave it in the future?
It definitely feels that that's the trend. I've even been in Europe this year, and I wondered if they would be the same, but I was in Italy, and they were definitely the same. Everywhere accepted cards, and that was their expectation as well, to receive payment through cards. But unfortunately, for those people in society who maybe are out of work and are really struggling. If organisations of retail outlets or taxis, even if they don't accept cash, for example, then it's really going to disadvantage and marginalise some areas of society, which I'm sure will be a struggle for them.
It's interesting looking at what happens in other countries. One person's messaged in to say, I live in Malta, show off. Most shops are cash only for under €10 purchases. Cash is essential. Relying only on banks for digital means far more risk if systems break down. Michael, it is interesting, isn't it? Because it feels like it's just an unstoppable phenomenon sped up by COVID, that we are moving further and further away from cash.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the government's plan to basically wrestle complete control of how money flows through the economy. But, you know, a lot of your listeners have made some very interesting points. And I'd like to add my tuppenny's worth. An awful lot of people, older people, struggle with tech. My elderly mother, for example, if she wants to set up a new payment to a contractor, she can't do it online unless I'm sitting there with her talking her through it, which means she has to go into a bank branch. Now, in our town, they're shutting down all the bank branches, which also means that the cash points are disappearing. So they struggle with tech, they struggle with OTP authentication, because you need a mobile phone for that, and you need a smartphone. You know, it's not just an ordinary phone. So for me, I think cash needs to stay, because ultimately, as was mentioned earlier, the people that use the cash the most generally tend to be at the lower end of the income scale.
I tell you what, you talk about giving your tuppence. Jim in Bristol says, I do wish copper coins would be abolished. Completely pointless. Jim, thanks very much. Do you keep your thoughts coming this morning? Mine go in a jar, and then every now and again I go and shake them into one of those machines in the supermarket. That's quite satisfying. It's a good moment. I'll tell you what, I think it's time to get excited. The Lionesses have the chance to make history when the Women's World Cup final kicks off on Sunday morning. And this comes, of course, after they beat the host team Australia on Wednesday in a spectacular 3-1 victory.
Can head wrap this up. She plays it to Russo. Russo inside the area! History for England. They are heading for their first ever Women's World Cup final.
I was following that match on a train, so I didn't hear the commentary, but I've heard that so many times now. I'm starting to feel like I was there. They will, of course, be taking on Spain at 11 a.m. UK time, and it will be the first time an English football team has played in a senior final match on the world stage since 1966. These fans have been giving their reaction to a historic moment.
Amazing! It was brilliant!
We are so buzzing. We've been waiting for this to happen for how long? We cannot wait for the final.
We're the Lionesses and we're ready for any challenge, you get me?
England! It's not ever been crossed that we're going to smash Spain in the final.
Well, they're excited, aren't they? Last night, the government said it's going to back pubs to open earlier for the game. It's encouraging councils in England to complete any licensing changes quickly so pubs can start pulling pints ahead of the 11 o'clock kickoff. Of course, that's only for pubs that have already applied for that. Lots won't have. Let me know if you fancy raising a pint at 11 a.m. to cheer on the team. Get in touch, 85058. I'm joined by Rebecca Derrick, the Global Business Director at the sports agency 50 Sport, and by Paul Waterson, who's Chief Executive of the Australian Venue Company, which owns over 200 bars and pubs all across Australia and New Zealand. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Felicity.
Thank you very, very much for joining us. Rebecca, I'll talk to you in just a moment. But first of all, Paul, go on then. What is the atmosphere like on the ground? What kind of World Cup have you been having in your 200 pubs and bars?
Oh, Felicity, it's been outstanding, although it was very painful listening to that commentary of that last goal again. It's, I think the Matildas has had an incredible ride, just weren't good enough last week. But, gee, it's really captured the imagination over here, and the attendances at pubs are sort of 40 to 60% higher than we've seen at equivalent days. So it's been very special.
That is very special. What do you think about the final, though? I mean, with the Matildas not playing, do you think that there's still excitement around that? Will you still be busy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so. I think the impact that the World Cup has had on this country will be enduring, and just the way people have embraced women's sport. We just have not seen anything like this over here. And I think what you're going to find is a fundamental change, and there's going to be really, really strong interest in the final on Sunday, our time.
What time will it be? What 11 a.m. in the UK? What time will it be for you?
So that's about 8 o'clock here, I think, at night.
Oh, that's a much better raise a pint kind of time. It must be pretty good. You're selling beer in a hot country and there's a big sporting fixture. I'm guessing it's going to be a good weekend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's going to be no shortage of drinkers, and hopefully they're coming for a meal beforehand.
Oh, yeah, get them that way. Very sensible. Line your stomach. Rebecca from the sports agency 50 Sports. One of your clients is England Football. 50 Sports been running its social media channels. What have the engagement levels been like during this World Cup?
I mean, you can only imagine the engagement has gone through the roof. We're getting fans that we didn't know would join us in this journey. We've seen over 100% increase in engagement on our Instagram channel, for example.
Oh, wow.
So it's been amazing. And our focus is really about growing a legacy and getting more girls and more women involved in football. So this has just had an already incredible impact, and I can't wait to see the figures post-Sunday. As a Kiwi, I'm pretty proud to be supporting the Lionesses. No offence, Paul.
I love that kind of that rivalry you get. Actually, we just had a message from Chris in Scotland who says, "Come on, Spain, you can do it." All of Scotland is rooting for you. I'm also joined now, I'm very pleased to say, by Mark Graham, co-founder of For the Fans, which organises big screen sporting events. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm very glad that you can join us for our sort of final football panel. What have you got going on this Sunday then? Where will you be showing the game?
Yeah, we've got a couple of fan parks, one in London, in Dalston, and we've got one on Hastings Pier as well. So, yeah, two big fan parks, hosting over 2,500 fans.
Wow.
So, yeah, very much looking forward to it.
And how does this compare to other sporting events in terms of trade and footfall and bookings?
I think obviously it's a growing sport. For us, for us, it was really important to be able to put on this massive tournament. You know, England have been gaining momentum over the last few years. The sport's been growing massively. I think for us, you know, it hasn't been as big as we probably thought it would be in terms of trade. It's extra trade, but in terms of numbers through the door, probably hasn't helped by the time of the games in the UK. We've probably seen anything between 10 and 60% uplift on the actual attendances. So, you know, it's probably on line with a Six Nations sort of tournament that we would do in the UK, which is still fantastic, you know, still good.
Now, we had this news last night that was this government encouragement for councils to process pub applications to be able to open earlier, start selling alcohol a little bit earlier, rather, because most pubs are unable to serve alcohol till 11 a.m. Some are restricted until midday, and they can choose when they open. They can open for breakfast, but it's that selling alcohol depends on its licence, and councils are perhaps going to. They're being encouraged to process applications more quickly. But of course, if you're a venue that hasn't got an application in to change your licensing, then you can't sell beer earlier. What about your particular sector, Mark? I mean, do you sell alcohol, and will you be?
We do sell alcohol, but it's really interesting you raise this point, because two venues that we wanted to actually host weren't given the license to open up early. So two venues that would have brought together probably 1,200 people for this Sunday were refused, as you say. So it's really
they were refused. Did they give a reason? I don't know what the process is normally like.
Just as per their license conditions, there was no movement on it, and that's hugely disappointing, you know, for families and for people that are looking for this type of activity. So yeah, it has been an issue. You know, yeah, it's disappointing.
Paul Waterston is sort of a version of you, but down under, and has 200 pubs and bars, and it's the evening, and he will no doubt be selling lots. But Paul, is the clientele different for the Women's World Cup final? Is it more family orientated? Does that mean kind of less big groups of people drinking beer and more meals and families out?
That's exactly the point, Felicity, and it's a far more even gender than we would normally see in a lot of the venues as well. So we've had up to sort of 60-40 female-male split, whereas often it's the other way. And we're definitely seeing people bringing in their kids and having a meal and then watching a game. And to put it in perspective, there was 12 million Australians watched the game the other night of a total of 25 million population. So it's just got enormous interest.
Enormous interest, Rebecca. Enormous interest. That's great for you doing what you do. There was some overshadowing, wasn't there? The World Cup slightly overshadowed by last-minute rows over broadcast rights, late sponsorship deals. Were there many missed commercial opportunities over this World Cup?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we were getting last-minute sponsorships almost 4 weeks before the tournament. For a men's tournament, you'd be booking those years in advance. So I think there's going to be a few sheepish CMOs out there who wanted to be able to activate it a bit smarter and get a little bit more authentically involved. But you can just see the figures coming through. I mean, the Matildas, for example, have increased in value 5 points. So CommBank's going to be laughing, and anyone who didn't get behind the Matildas will be much the same. And we're seeing the same with the Lionesses, even as arguably the top team in the world. Still for them,
fingers crossed.
I'm going to claim it either way. But, you know, they were still seeing sponsors coming in really late and activations coming in late.
It's really interesting, isn't it? We know women's sport is vastly underinvested compared to men's. I mean, now that the Lionesses are in the final, do you think this gives women's football more negotiating power, more investment opportunities in the future?
Definitely. I think they have the right to say no now. It's been a bit of a, we'll take what we can get. We just need the investment behind it. We want to pay our players fairly. We want to make sure that we're getting their brand out there. But we're seeing that their brand value is worth almost the same as the men's now. It's, you know, there's a lot of data behind it, but they're so accessible. They're so relatable. Brands want to get behind them and really be part of that journey.
Rebecca Derrick, Global Business Director at sports agency 50 Sport. Thank you, Mark Graham, co-founder of For the Fans. Thank you very much. And Paul Waterston, Chief Executive of the Australian Venue Company. I bet you're going to have a good weekend. Have a very, very good time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you also, of course, to Carlene Jackson from Cloud9 Insight and Michael Hewson, Chief Market Analyst at CMC Markets UK. Thank you to you for all your messages. Last couple before we go. Somebody says criminals rely on cash. Doncaster's being looted daily and all sold for cash. It needs to go. Ivor in Norwich says, I'm for cash because I've been hacked, which made me unhappy with cards. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being with us.
Wake up to money from BBC 5 Live.
That's it from Wake Up to Money. Don't forget to subscribe on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. And when you do, we'd love it if you'd leave us a review. You can also contact us anytime on social media using the hashtag WakeUpToMoney.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
One of the biggest football events in the calendar is upon us.
That is absolutely sensational!
That's right, the January transfer window is defying the British winter and is wedged wide open.
The Transfer Gossip Daily Podcast with Maisie Adam.
Every day throughout the month, I'll be joined by some of the country's best football journalists to dissect the day's most tantalising transfer rumours from across the world, all in under 10 minutes.
What will happen next?
Keep up to date with all the comings and goings fresh from the rumour mill with the Transfer Gossip Daily Podcast. Listen on BBC